Great to be back with you tonight on the Real Messiah broadcast. It's been a couple of weeks since we've been with you on WMCA all over New York City and coming your way on YouTube and Facebook as well. We were preempted by some sports events, some basketball games, part of a contract WMCA has that comes up here and there, but great to be back with you. 866-34-TRUTH. If you are a Jewish person with questions about Jesus the Messiah, if you object to me as a Jew being a follower of Yeshua, if you want to talk Messianic prophecy or specific issues, phone lines are open, 866-34-TRUTH. Before we go to the phones tonight, I want to address a video. I've been asked about it by a few different friends, so I wanted to take a few minutes to address this. Rabbi Tovia Singer, counter-missionary rabbi, with whom I had two debates in the early 90s, one private, one public. Since that time, he's refused to debate me or have any dealings with me. So this is over 25 years now. I remain wide open to debate him on a serious level with a good format where we can lay everything out and have good mutual exchange, cross-examination, etc. Let the audience question us. Would love to, would be delighted to. But this video was pointed out to me, and Rabbi Singer is in Israel. He's doing a talk, and at the end of it, a Messianic Jew asks him about a couple of things. One is Daniel 9, Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 to 27. And according to this Messianic Jew, it gives a prophecy that tells us the very day that Jesus was going to come, or the very day that Jesus was going to be crucified. So it's a very specific prophecy. How can that possibly be denied? Rabbi Singer responds to that. And then Psalm 22, the argument is that in the oldest Hebrew manuscripts, the oldest Hebrew texts, that the text would read, they pierced my hands and feet rather than like a lion. They're at my hands and feet. Psalm 22, many Christians look at as the crucifixion psalm, and Tovia responds to that. So I've been asked about this, and I thought, since we're always trying to instruct, we're always trying to educate, we're always trying to interact in a constructive way, it would be worth it to take some time on tonight's broadcast to open these things up and to interact with Rabbi Singer. First, let me give this little bit of background. Daniel 9, 24 to 27, I believe, ultimately should be read as a Messianic prophecy. Some would argue it had an earlier reference to the defiling of the temple under Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV, so 160 or so years before Jesus, and it's speaking of the consecration of the temple there. But it's clear to me and to many others that it's speaking of something more than that. And what I've argued is not for the exact day of the Messiah's coming. I've not argued that you can find the exact day of the Messiah's coming or the exact day of the Messiah's crucifixion, as some have argued, but rather that what's clear is that the Messiah had to come and accomplish his work of redemption, that he had to come and make atonement for our sins before the second temple was destroyed in Daniel 9, 24 to 27. And in that sense, in that regard, that is a significant Messianic prophecy. Rabbi Singer takes issue with that very strongly and raises this point. In fact, he gets quite exercised over this. So let's listen to clip number 1 from Rabbi Singer's presentation.
You have to believe that not one writer or apostolic father, that means Clement I of Rome, it's Daniel 9, meaning the text from verse 24 and 25, 24, 25, 26, 27 is never quoted in the Christian Bible. They just went, yeah, we do have the exact calculation of Jesus' death, but there are more important things than that.
Ah, actually, that's kind of a glaring, shocking statement by Rabbi Singer. Extraordinarily so, in fact. Yeah, no New Testament writer makes reference to it. Nobody? How about Jesus himself? How about Matthew 24, 15? Matthew 24, 15. Yeshua says, so when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, and he goes on and says, let The reader, take note. This is the only time that this unique expression is used, Matthew 24 and the parallel in Mark 13, where Jesus is specifically saying, take note, look at this text, take note of this. And where is that passage? Well, the abomination of desolation is mentioned a few times in Daniel, including Daniel 9:27. So Yeshua himself is saying, look at this passage. Make sure you look at it. And it's obviously something having to do with the destruction of the temple that was going to come, and he was warning his followers about it. So he's drawing our attention to this very prophecy. Quite remarkable. Rabbi Singer says no one quotes it, no one makes reference to it. No, Jesus himself makes explicit reference to it. Now, we also know, Paul writing Galatians 4 mentions the Messiah coming in the fullness of time, and there was a sense there are other Jewish traditions inside and outside what becomes rabbinic Judaism that make reference to this text as well. And this is fairly well known. It doesn't you research it online and get some good academic papers that are available online that go through this and how things were looked at chronologically. But there was a sense, others have written about it as well. There was a sense of living in this time, this fullness of time, this Messianic era. In fact, from what we understand, the Essenes at Qumran had calculated things using the 70 weeks and were expecting the revelation of Messiah, which would have been, 30 or so years before, 35 years before Jesus was crucified. The point is, though, that Jesus refers to this and points to this very passage, telling us to take note. So the very thing Rabbi Singer said, it was so important, somebody would have pointed to, Jesus did, and tell us to take note of it. So that's the first thing. That's big. That's very major. And by the way, I've addressed this at great length, from Rashi's commentary to current counter-missionary work, some of the very, very weakest work that's ever been done, in my view. Some of the worst and weakest arguments that have been given to Daniel 9:24-27. I've interacted candidly with folks that I think this is some of the weakest what I've seen. And even Rashi's commentary, what's he actually saying? It's somehow messianic, but future. And anyway, it really breaks down, So the Messiah had to come and accomplish his atoning work before the second temple was destroyed. And the Messiah himself pointed readers to that text in conjunction with the destruction of the temple spoken of in that very passage. As to the idea, well, why don't the apostolic fathers talk about it? How come none of them talk about it? Well, for the most part, they're not writing about messianic prophecy or proving things to Jews or other. These are pastoral letters and things like that dealing with issues, but you have within the first 2 centuries. So the early part of what others would call the Christian era, references being made to this very passage, Daniel 9:24-27. Again, I just checked to see what you can find online. Look for early Christian interpretation of Daniel's 70 weeks, and you'll find references from early on in Christian literature. Where did they get the idea? Perhaps the fact that Jesus drew attention to the passage? All right. Let's go over to Psalm 22. And Rabbi Singer there is referencing Psalm 22:17 in Hebrew, 16 in some of our English translations. And should the text say, like a lion, my hands and feet, in which case Rashi says, like a lion, they mauled my hands and feet, because there's a verb missing, like a lion, my hands and feet. So they're like a lion, they're at my hands and feet, they're mauling my hands and feet, which would still work as a good description of crucifixion. Or could it be that other ancient texts and translations indicate that the correct reading is they pierced? So let's take a look at what Rabbi Singer says, clip number 3.
Before I even go into this, why isn't this quoted in the Christian Bible? That means if first century Christians believed that it's said, that means if we're lying and the first followers of Yeshua, okay, I play by the rules, believe that said they pierced my hands and my feet, you have to believe that they didn't think that was an important enough verse to quote.
Actually, very surprising again. Yeshua himself hanging on the cross, quotes from Psalm 22:1, drawing our attention to the entire psalm. That's one reason he cries it out on the cross, to draw our attention to the psalm. And then other specific instances from the Psalms, how the mockers mock him using the language of Psalm 22, how they part his garments among them using a very specific description in Psalm 22. That's enough to draw our attention. And by the way, The New Testament makes reference to Isaiah 53 in a number of different ways, clearly telling us it's messianic, clearly telling us to look at it, but it doesn't quote every key verse. He was wounded for our transgressions. It doesn't quote all of that relevant section there. It just quotes parts here and there. That happens with other Psalms as well, and other prophecies as well. That attention is drawn to the Psalm as a whole, or to the passage as a whole, or to the chapter as a whole. That's what the New Testament does. So Psalm 22 is clearly featured in the New Testament and is definitely something that the eyes of the New Testament authors were on, and the early followers of Yeshua were certainly looking at, without question. So again, honestly, I'm surprised. I'm surprised by how this breaks down, but it gets much, much worse. And what troubles me is people will see Rabbi Singer's video or be in his audience and think that what he was saying was accurate, think that what he was saying was factual because he was so passionate about it. But as you're about to see in front of your eyes, friends, it completely breaks down. Clip number 4.
Every single Bible in the whole world says the same word in Hebrew. Not one Bible ever found says they pierced.
Oh, sorry. Squirming a little bit. Okay. He's saying every Hebrew text, every Hebrew Bible that's ever been found reads ka'ari, like a lion. None of them read ka'aru, which is taken to mean they pierced or they dug through, as a biform of karu. None of them say that. Rather, they all say ka'ari, like a lion. Not a single Hebrew manuscript, not a single Hebrew Bible in the entire world ever has read that way. Ever, ever, ever. None of them say this alleged ka'aru. None of them say karu. Okay. I guess Rabbi Singer is not familiar with the massive collocation of all Masoretic manuscripts done by two scholars separately a few centuries back, Kennicott and de Rossi. So these are books written in Latin that give every last Masoretic manuscript. And so you have to understand there are thousands of Masoretic manuscripts, and there are all kinds of variations. All right. So I copied this out. Okay. You can actually access the book in PDF form online. I copied this out. I magnified it. I underlined a few things. So I'm going to put it on the screen. If you're listening, I'll do my best to explain. But let's go to image 5, clip number 5. And I'm sorry. First Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. That's the right image. Put that up. Number 5. Put that back up. Okay. So first from Qumran Cave 4Q88, with further reference. This is a fragment from Psalm 22. Now, it has the letters for Hikifuni, and they are written with these little circles on top, meaning that the text is not 100% clear. All right. But then there's Kaf Resh, and then a Vav, Karu. All right. So the Vav is not certain, and then Yadai, Baraglai, so my hands and my feet. But notice there's no Aleph there. This text is from Hasmonean times, so this text is from well before the time of Jesus. All right. And it does not have the Aleph. And the most likely reading is Karu, but certainly it does not have the Aleph there, which would support the idea that the text originally said Karu or Ka'aru. And Karu, as we'll show in a little while, can mean to dig through, to bore through, hence can be used, obviously, to cut through, to bore through. Crucifixion would obviously work well with that concept. And then, although he tries to downplay this from Nachal Hever, so these texts were a little bit later. This would be from a century or so after Jesus, but many of these have been dated to well before Jesus. But either way, these are Jewish texts, okay? These are Jewish texts, Jewish collections. So there we have Ka'aru. You say, well, I think it's just a yud at the end. It's Ka'ari. The best Dead Sea Scroll scholars have examined this and looked at this. People who specialize in orthography, and they're not an axe to grind. They're just transcribing what it says, and they're all looking at the same pictures and then studying it in person, looking at it. Ka'aru is the best reading. All right. But what about the Masoretic manuscripts? Let's go to clip number 6 here, our 6th image. Let's look at this. And Kai, just leave this up for a little while. All right. So again, if you're listening on radio and you're not watching, I'm going to do my best to explain this to you. But what you have here is series of numbers. And what it's telling you is, okay, in this particular manuscript, which scholars number as thus and such, number 4, 38, or 40, etc., that the main Masoretic text means one thing, but you have X number of manuscripts that read something different. So, for example, instead of ka'ari, like a lion, you have one manuscript, number 245, that reads ka'aryeh. These are Masoretic manuscripts, Masoretic Hebrew texts, late medieval and after, okay? So it's a more full spelling of lion, ka'aryeh, instead of ka'ari. But you have the text, and I underlined it, ka'aru, kaf, aleph, resh, vav, which Rabbi Singer said does not exist in a single Masoretic text, Masoretic Bible, anywhere in the world. False, 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 false. How many times false? Well, here you have it. Manuscript number 39, 267, 270, 277, and then 288 and 660, and then some other variations. Then you have some other marginal ones. So overall, you have it attested about 8 different times. You say, well, it's just 8. Hey, when someone says none exist, when someone says there is not a manuscript on the planet where this exists, and here, and any scholar knows the Kennecott collection, okay? DeRossi then just supplemented it with errors and with variations in the vowels as well. But any Hebrew scholar, biblical scholar, is familiar with this compilation. It is just a list of the Masoretic manuscripts, Masoretic Hebrew manuscripts. When Rabbi Singer says never occurs, 0, no manuscripts, no Hebrew Bible, nowhere, and he's very dramatic about it. Well, you got at least 8 times. And then 4 or 5 times you have karu. So this is a legitimate variant in these Masoretic manuscripts, karu or karu. Okay, so as I said, I'm kind of shocked to see these things. And I want to play one more clip from Rabbi Singer. But I just have to honestly say, I watch this stuff in a state of shock, just on a scholarly level. Forget polemics. Forget who's right or wrong. Forget any of that for the moment, okay? Obviously, those are life and death issues, who the Messiah is and how we respond to him. Of course, I understand that. But just putting aside, just simply from the standpoint of Hebrew scholarship, biblical scholarship, manuscript scholarship, it's kind of shocking to see these things. I don't mean to be insulting. It's just when people make a big deal of it and say, well, look at this, he's an authority. Maybe on certain things, I don't know. But these areas, clearly not. Okay, so let's listen again to Rabbi Singer. Clip number 7.
This is Sheker v'chazav is a lie. Kaf, Aleph, Resh, Vav. What does that word mean? Anybody? What is the word in Hebrew where I'm standing here in the land of Israel, filled with Hebrew speakers? You all don't tell me none of you speak Hebrew. Kaf, Aleph, Resh, Vav. What does this word mean? It means nothing. There is no such word. I'm not going to get into it. You can't have a verb with the aleph in it as a root. I don't want to get complicated. There is no such word. You have been lied to.
Oh, that really makes me squirm. Whoa, unreal. Oh, okay, so let's first start. He's going to ask a Hebrew-speaking audience what karu means, and they say nothing. There's no such word. Okay. First problem is there are many words from biblical Hebrew and biblical vocabulary that are not used in Hebrew today. In fact, I embarrassed myself talking to Israelis in the 70s when I was studying Hebrew because my biblical Hebrew was much better than my modern, and I'd say things in biblical Hebrew and they'd shake their heads. No. This is the way you say it now. We don't use those terms. Not that they were bad terms, but just they're not used anymore. Expressions, grammatical things. So he's going to prove a point about a biblical Hebrew word from 3,000 years ago and say, well, is it spoken today? If not, it's gibberish. I guess, though, what gets the biggest reaction from me is when he says you can't have an aleph as a root. You can't have an aleph as a root letter in a Hebrew verb. So in other words, this has a middle aleph, kaf, aleph, resh, right? You can't have an aleph in a verbal root. What? I mean, how many verbs do you have? I mean, just go. How do you say to elucidate? It's beit aleph resh, that verb. All right. to worry, Dalet Aleph Gimel, to redeem, Gimel Aleph Lamed. I mean, word after word after word. To weary, Lamed Aleph Hey. Slowness is connected with Lamed Aleph Tet. I mean, on and on. Example after example after example after example. Just take just biblical Hebrew lexicon, or even a modern Hebrew lexicon if you want to. You'll see the same phenomena there. You just go through it and look for each verbal roots, and then just scroll down to where Aleph would be the second one. You have example after example after example. Words that he knows perfectly well. So what was that? Was that just a total brain freeze? Or was there an intentional attempt to mislead an audience? Either way, that makes me squirm. And then what about this idea that there is no root, Kaf, Aleph, Resh? Well, may I just do this again? I know we're on radio, so you can watch this later on YouTube at Ask Dr. Brown, AskDR Brown. You can watch this, but I'm just going to put a few images up on the screen. And Kai, keep the image up until I tell you to switch. Let's look at image number 8. This is from the Klein's Hebrew Lexicon, Dictionary of Classical Hebrew, one of the greatest modern scholarly accomplishments in the Hebrew language, not just using Hebrew Bible, but Dead Sea Scrolls, etc. It has two possible roots, Kaf, Aleph, Resh. All right? Two possible roots. And one of them is pointing to Psalm 22, the very verse we're looking at, based on manuscript evidence, some of the evidence we just looked at, Masoretic manuscript evidence. So that's a possible one. Does it mean to bind? There's speculation there. And then there's another root, Kaf, Aleph, Resh, meaning to be repulsive. It's reflected in the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are citations given there, etc. The word kaor, repulsive, and then it could be they're made repulsive, mutilated. Is that what it's talking about in Psalm 22? So the question is, how do these relate to Psalm 22? But these are two different entries under a root that Rabbi Singer says never existed. Not only do we have it attested in the Dead Sea Scrolls and at Psalm 22 in Nachal Hever in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but we have it used in other ways as well. So the root exists. The root certainly exists. Okay, so that's one scholarly lexicon used by Jewish and Christian Old Testament scholars. All right, let's look at image number 9. This is from the Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament that started as Kohler Baumgartner. Then others worked on it as well, including the great Aramaic scholar Yechezkel Kutcher, Israeli scholar. This is widely used by Jewish and Christian scholars studying the Hebrew Bible. And they point to a root kara, kaf, resh, hey, a root kara, meaning, and we've got parallels in Old South Arabian and Arabic and Aramaic and Punic, etc., meaning to dig a channel for a river in some of these other languages, and in the Bible to hollow out, to dig, as in digging a well, Genesis 26:25, or Numbers 21:18, or a cistern in Exodus 21:30, and verse after verse, digging out a pit. In Psalm 40, Osnaim karitali, you have dug out, so opened up my ears. All right? So this is a potential reading in some manuscripts, and in one Dead Sea Scroll manuscript, karu, meaning they dug out my hands and feet. Again, if it has to do with digging out with piercing, is it related concept? Could well be. Many scholars believe that is the case, hence the usage there in a very violent way, pointing to crucifixion. And then the other argument is that ka'aru is just a biform of karu, and we know that this often happens where the aleph is part of a biform of a word. Just look at how it occurs in Hebrew and Aramaic in terms of certain words with what would be called weak roots, all right? So with a vav in the middle or something like that, sometimes you go to Aramaic, has an aleph. So these are all perfectly plausible. Sorry if I lost anyone, but last image, okay? All right, the Brown Driver Biggs lexicon. This came out in the early 1900s, an edition of the famous Gesenius lexicon, and one of the most widely used to this day by scholars of the Hebrew language, both Jewish and Christian. So at Psalm 22 has Ari, lion, gives the references there. But then it says this, that they're suggesting reading ka'aru, which equals karu. So they dug through, they dug out my hands and feet, which within mirror the Septuagint. They pierced my hands and feet. And contrary to Rabbi Singer, there's ample evidence of the Septuagint being completed as a Jewish work before the time of Jesus. So, bottom line, here's what we get. And we're done with that image. We're good now. Number one, massive error on Daniel 9. If it was so important, why wasn't it referred to? It is. It is by Jesus, Matthew 24, Mark 13. And not only so, early church leaders make reference to it as well, recognizing its significance having to do with Messianic prophecy before the second temple was destroyed. That's number one. Number two, Psalm 22, quoted, referred to explicitly in the New Testament. Therefore, you're going to read all the passages, including they pierced my hands and feet. All right. Number three, Dead Sea Scroll evidence supporting reading of karu without an aleph, therefore not like a lion. And then, yes, Nachal Hever, Qumran scroll, strongly pointing to ka'aru with a vav, not a yud. So again, not like a lion. And then, contrary to Rabbi Singer's denial, saying there's not a single Hebrew manuscript in the world, Masoretic manuscript, that reads this way. I post this actual image from the Kennecott volume where he lists the Masoretic manuscripts that read ka'aru or karu. All right. And then on top of that, extraordinary error, mind-bogglingly error, saying that you're not going to have a verbal root with an aleph in it. Again, either he failed to explain himself or just had brain freeze. That can happen to anybody. But when people think then immediately correct the video or pull that part or make a statement, I made an error there. And then that there's no root ka'ar. Well, there is, and it's attested in lexicons in different contexts. And there are explanations as to how you can have kara or ka'ar and how they are related. So can we prove that the earliest reading was they pierced or they dug through my hands and my feet? Can't prove it, but there's very, very strong evidence for it. And by the way, even if it was like a lion, my hands and feet, the verb is missing. Hence the explanation, like a lion, they mauled my hands and feet, which was also an excellent description of crucifixion. So this would be one of these things of like, when a pitcher strikes out the sides on 9 pitches, swing and miss at each one, each major point he was making was a swing and a miss. So I just wanted to take the time to set the record straight. Truth. Pursue the truth. Follow the truth. It's worth it.